Well, hello again. Thanks for coming. We're going to have a quick chat this time about malted barley, and specifically have a wee chat about coloured malts or roasted malts. Has anyone got any experience of that?
Yeah, we have. I mean, the coloured malts as you're talking about is very prevalent in the craft brewing. You anywhere you go, they'll do it at various levels. There's one or two in the Scotch that have been doing what they call the chocolate or the crystal malt, so that's likes of Glenmorangie and Tomatin, and what that means is it's been roasted at a high level, so you get more of the Maillard reaction taking place, so you get more of the chocolatey espresso notes coming from it. But the problem with going to such a high kilning level is you denature all the enzymes. So it means then you can't do 100% of that malt because there's no enzymes to do the conversion. So we've done some as part of our Prinlaw's collection where we took some Munich malt, which is as high as you can go in normal kilning, so it's quite heavily kilned. And then because we've got the mash filter, we were able to go over 50% of that type of malt. And we mixed it with standard malt because there's enough free enzymes within the standard malt to do the conversion. And we got the PSY of the actual Munich malt was like 290, so it's really, really low. But for us, we were just purely looking at it from a flavour point of view. And when we did it through the mash filter, once the wort was black, I mean, it was like espresso. There was some coffee notes, but there was a lot of chocolatey notes coming through it. And then when we came to do the distillation, it was trying to see how much of the flavours would come through in the distillation. I'm glad to say we managed to get the maltiness comes a lot more through it. But on the taste, when you have like say chocolate, really dark chocolate, you get that lovely astringency in your tongue. That's what flavours came through in the final distillate. So now is the question that I have and why we're doing it is we've created this liquid that is so different in flavour to our standard liquid. During the maturation, are we going to see those flavour profiles get stronger, or are they going to be diminished? So we've chosen a cask profile so that we can allow the spirit to talk. We can actually hear it, because if you put it into something too strong, then my concern would be it would just be not overdeveloped, but override the flavours that we got from it. So for me, there's definitely an opportunity here. There's different flavours that you can achieve from just really changing the kilning process. But unfortunately, as I said, the processing of it can be quite difficult to handle.
So do you think the processing and the drop in yield might mean it's something that's not really pushed across the whisky industry?
No, I think there is people, as I said, out there doing it, and they're getting a completely different flavour profile to what they're looking for. So I think there is innovation there, and I think there's an interest for it to be different, but it will come at a price. It won't be your standard cost of a product, because it costs you more to produce, and the return, the yield is significantly lower, because the cost of the actual malt is a lot more expensive because it's had to be processed for longer and a little different way. But the flavour profiles that I've certainly seen in early stages is promising from my point of view.
And you spoke about enzymes. What's the issue around the enzymes?
Well, as you know, to the conversion of your starch to sugars during the mashing process, you require the enzyme that's already part of the barley corn. But by you kilning it at that higher temperature, you actually kill them off. So what you have to do is you have to include a portion of normal malted barley to be able to provide the extra enzymes to do that conversion of the starch into sugars.
If I could just jump in on that point as well, it's similar, like where the category of pot still whiskey in Ireland, where we use unmalted barley, where you wouldn't, because it hasn't gone through the malting phase, it doesn't have those enzymes, but you can rely on generally malt has enough diastatic power, enough enzymes to break down more than the starch it contains within its own grain, if that makes sense. So as long as you get that balancing act in, you will get the conversion. It's not just a case of that you're completely losing out if you balance. In Ireland, we've gone as far as 70% of unmalted grains, and you start to see a drop off once you go beyond, depending on your brewing methods, once you start to push beyond 50-60%. 70 is probably on the extreme, but it doesn't mean that it's not a viable, if it is pulling in characteristics. I suppose a question I would have is, do you think a challenge that I have, I suppose, with it is that people are so familiar with the idea, or certain people are so familiar with the idea of specialty malts from a craft brewing perspective, and they're so present, the difference, but I don't know that the flavour profile translates. It certainly has a difference. Do you think that is an issue where people are expecting, they have their chocolate malted craft beer, and then they're expecting it to be this massively chocolate malt?
I think there's the chocolate element within brewing is very craft, very niche. So a small portion of people maybe know that that's where it started from. I think you're starting to see some of the mainstream ones. I spoke about Glenmorangie have one, the Signet, that uses chocolate malt. So people are already experiencing that in a luxury product. And I think is that they've started it. So I think people are already aware of it. So but ultimately it's the consumers wanting a little bit more knowledge. So as long as you can educate them in what you're doing, why you're doing it, and also what flavour profiles you're looking to bring over from that grain into the final distillate. It's all about educating them, and I think there is definitely a thirst, for a better term, for the consumer looking for something a little bit different.
Yeah, but I think it's, having tasted the Signet, it's not chocolatey. Yeah, like some of the craft beers.
There's a bit of a problem. Chocolate refers to the colour, not the flavour.
Yeah. That's it. So.
Well, yeah, but even to preconceptions around certain malts, that obviously the distillation method and the maturation method will dampen or alter that, and it's not quite as clear cut as something you just brew and then that's your product.
I think the issue using these different malts is they're designed for brewing, and so as you say, we get this huge drop in yield with some change in flavours. Now, you were talking about Maillard reactions. Maillard reactions are between an amino acid and a fatty acid. They don't distill over, so they remain behind. I mean, also you get other volatiles, and the changes other volatiles that will distill over, and so you obviously get a flavour change. So we're losing yield. What I'm really saying, I think cut long story short, is we should develop malts for distilling, as we have done with our ordinary everyday malts, that rather than trying to shoehorn in.
Yeah, so maybe try and make more coloured malts for distilling, rather than just taking the craft.
Which needs a bit of obviously needs a discussion with maltsters, and maltsters I suppose are quite open to that type.
No, I think there's a growing. It's growing in people looking for more than just standard malt. I think they're looking at it as an opportunity to develop other flavours, because if you can develop a different flavour in the malted barley, is that transferable during the mashing, during the fermentation, and then through into the distillation? It's all about trial and error and seeing how you go.
So I think there's a need there in terms of innovation to develop different malts that give different flavour profiles. But I will come back to, you heard me say again and again, nothing's a big lever in flavour terms. Everything is equally important. So we're not going to see big changes with changing malt. We change variety of barley, for instance, quite regularly, and we don't see big changes in flavour. So it should be an evolutionary change with that, and using them to enhance this Scotch whisky flavours. And as it come back, I personally believe we should stop using brewing malts because we're paying way over the odds, and we're not really getting much flavour advantage out of that. So let's develop some toasted malts that start to affect the volatiles that we can collect, and will have an effect on that, and will have an advantageous effect. And I think there's quite a bit of development to be done there. And as you say, I think some companies are already beginning to go down that route.
Excellent. Well, good point to finish on. Thank you very much, chaps. Excellent. Thank you.